Tonight on the late debate.
The ayes to the right, 328. The noes to the left, 301.
Boris's Brexit gamble backfires. The Prime Minister pushes for an election after Conservative MPs rebel. I'm joined by Dominic Grieve, one of those MPs who defied the new PM and ended up losing his place in the party. Also on the programme, with an election looming, the battle lines are already being drawn in the most marginal seat in England.
We're certainly ready here in Kensington for a general election.
We've been campaigning all summer. We campaign most of the year round. So in theory, we will be ready to get into election mode.
Good evening. Has there ever been a week like it in British politics? Boris Johnson lost his majority, a series of important votes and faced a rebellion. And today his own brother resigned as a minister. The parliamentary week began not on Monday but Tuesday when MPs set out to take control of Commons business and stop a no-deal Brexit.
I wasn't sent here by my constituents to make them poorer, to put their jobs at risk and their health care.
We have a responsibility, having been elected in 2017 on manifestos to respect the referendum result, to do so, to stop prevaricating.
We are in uncharted constitutional territory, so it is absolutely right and proper that we exercise our judgment in the interests of the country to avoid, at the very least, a no-deal Brexit.
We are not talking about, as ministers do, bumps in the road. We are talking about job losses and businesses closing.
Too many Remain MPs in this place will use any device to try to block Brexit.
What we're saying today to people is, what is the point of voting?
The debate ended with the first of a series of defeats for Boris Johnson.
The ayes to the right, 328. The noes to the left, 301.
The Prime Minister revealed his next move, a general election.
The public will have to choose who goes to Brussels on October the 17th to sort this out.
Minister. Yesterday he engaged in the first of his weekly clashes with Jeremy Corbyn. But how many more will there be?
There's only one chlorinated chicken that I can see in this house, and he's on that bench.
If the Prime Minister does to the country what he's done to his party in the past 24 hours, I think a lot of people have a great deal to fear.
Order! 24 hours ago, Mr Johnson suffered yet another defeat when MPs refused to back his call for a snap election. Dominic Grieve was one of the Tory rebels who sided with the opposition to defeat the Prime Minister. The MP for Beaconsfield joins me now. Dominic, thank you for coming in. You're a former Attorney General, the son of a Conservative MP. Presumably there's Tory blood in your veins. What does it feel like to be kicked out of the parliamentary party?
Quite painful, really. It wasn't expected in that form, not until I was warned that that would be the consequence of joining with colleagues in the vote on Tuesday.
It didn't put you off, did it deter you, obviously?
Not at all. The more this debate has gone on, the more convinced I am that I'm afraid the government is off the rails, and this attempt to have a no-deal Brexit is probably the worst wound to inflict on our country possible. I will do everything I can to stop it.
How much animosity do you feel towards Boris Johnson?
I feel no animosity towards him at all.
Really?
No. I look at him and I am sad to see somebody who clearly has considerable talent putting that talent to a use that appears to me to be so poor and bad. And I also worry about seeing somebody with his undoubted talents. He wouldn't have become Prime Minister if he hadn't had them. Actually, when he's at the dispatch box, failing to answer questions, evading perfectly legitimate points that is being put to him, because if that is the technique he's going to adopt, then I have to say I think his ability to perform as a Prime Minister is questionable and his days will be numbered.
We heard today that his brother Joe has resigned as Universities Minister and is going to stand down as MP for Orpington. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it speaks for itself. Obviously, Joe Johnson, who I know very well, clearly has gone because he finds his own personal views irreconcilable with the extraordinary policies being pursued by his brother. And not only being pursued, but the manner in which they're being pursued. A diktat, a sort of radicalisation of the party, expelling MPs who disagree with you. The Conservative Party has been a broad church. Our success has been as a pragmatic party, which has respected difference. After all, there are people like Bill Cash who've rebelled hundreds of times in the course of their career, but nobody's gone around saying, you're not a Conservative, Bill, get out.
And when you have something like this with Joe Johnson, it almost becomes a family tragedy.
It does. No, there are tragic elements to this, as I say. He was a successful mayor for London, Boris Johnson, but I look at what is happening, and it seems to me to be a downward spiral in which he is progressively losing the House of Commons and losing large sections of the party.
There are members of your association in Beaconsfield who are furious at the stand you've taken. Can you understand why people think it's you who's betrayed the Conservative Party, not the other way round?
Yes, I can understand that. I can understand that Brexit, unfortunately, has unleashed deep divisions within the country, and that's reflected in the party, and it's reflected within my own association in Beaconsfield. And I've been struggling to find a way through this. One of the reasons why I'm a supporter of a second referendum is because I happen to think it offers a way out, and one which will be decisive. But extraordinarily, people seem to, instead of wanting to find their own solution, which is imposing something on others, rather than going and consulting people again in view of the mess we're now in.
How does Boris Johnson clean up the mess?
Well, the best way of cleaning up the mess is firstly...
He's not going to go for a referendum, but is there a way out of it for him?
He would be very well advised to do so. What other way out is there? Look at his situation. Look at the situation of the country. He's not negotiating for a deal. He appears to be trying to push a no-deal Brexit to get us over the line. If he does that, far from ending things, it's the start of years of difficult negotiation with the EU for a future trading relationship. So Brexit won't be over on the 1st of November. Round 2 of the nightmare will be starting. So, and in any case, I don't think he's going to get there. Then he says he wants a general election. But let's look at it logically. A general election is very unlikely to resolve this issue. It might deliver a Labour government. It might deliver a Conservative government.
Will you support him in the vote for a general election?
At the present time, I think I will certainly not vote for a general election until I am satisfied that we have an extension of Article 50 of a sufficient length of time to allow any election to take place, and on top of that, to enable any incoming government to have a period in which it can negotiate with the EU without being under pressure. It is an absolute requirement, and I think most members of Parliament think that. I also happen to think, as I say, general elections unlikely to solve our problem.
Judging by what you've just said, you're not expecting there to be any way back for you into the Conservative Party, into the Parliamentary Party?
Well, I don't know about that. I think you'll find there are many members of the Parliamentary Party still in it who agree with every word I've just said. So,
do you expect to be invited back?
I have no idea. I have no expectation of being invited back whatsoever. I will sit as an independent Conservative MP for as long as I've had the whip withdrawn. I will continue to do my duty as a constituency MP, and if we have an election and I'm still not a Conservative candidate, I shall have to think carefully about what I intend to do then.
Will you stand as an independent?
I might do, yes. I think it depends very much on the stage of Brexit that we have reached, because if we are still mired in a crisis, I think simply to say, no, I'm going to give up and walk away would be unacceptable to me. And I think also shortchanging my constituents.
And if Boris Johnson offered an olive leaf and let you and the other rebels back, could you possibly stand on a Conservative manifesto that endorsed his Brexit strategy?
Well, I think the current Brexit strategy, no. But who knows, maybe he will see sense over the weeks to come and realise that he's pursuing a strategy that is a complete dead end.
Do you think he will?
He's a man of talent, as I said to you, so it is always possible he may change his mind. I suspect you'll have to sack Mr Cummings first.
Dominic Grieve, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, with everyone anticipating a general election before Christmas, the battle for London has already begun, especially in England's most marginal constituency, Kensington, where the majority is a wafer-thin 20 votes. In Notting Hill, the sound of a steel drum is never far away. And on Portobello Road, you don't have to go far either to hear what people think of Boris Johnson's first 6 weeks in charge of the country.
Chaos. You know, it's like the blind leading the blind.
I think he's being a trickster.
Boris has got a lot of enthusiasm, and let's hope that he wins and we get some sort of decision on this.
This is a place which proves in politics the unthinkable can happen. For as long as anyone can remember, voters in this affluent West London suburb elected a Conservative MP, often with a thumping majority. But then, in the 2017 general election, the Labour candidate, Emma Dent-Coad, did what no one expected. She won. Suddenly, Kensington had a Labour MP. She's in no doubt Boris Johnson's Brexit strategy will be a defining issue in the next election.
My opponent, prospective opponent, and many of the senior Conservatives on the council are Brexiters and they support his position. But what I'm finding is that they're completely out of step with a vast majority of the electorate out there.
The Conservatives have chosen a new candidate to try to win back the seat, Felicity Buchan.
I think the majority of Kensington residents realise that we've had the referendum and we do need to get on and implement Brexit. We cannot have this interminable delay.
But in Kensington, it isn't all about Brexit. Grenfell Tower casts a shadow over this constituency. Voters will have to wait many months, maybe years, for the final conclusions of the official inquiry into the tragedy. But it seems they won't have to wait long for an election.
We're certainly ready here in Kensington for a general election, should it take place.
Well, we've been campaigning all summer. We campaign most of the year round. So, in theory, we will be ready to get into election mode.
When Labour won this seat 2 years ago, just 20 votes separated the two parties. Kensington is the most marginal constituency, not just in London, but in England. Joining me to look forward to the looming contest is Rupert Huck, the Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton, Paul Scully, the Sutton and Cheam MP, who's also a Vice Chair of the Conservative Party, and Tom Brake, the Liberal Democrats' Brexit spokesman and MP for Carshalton and Wallington. Paul, we heard a gentleman in Portobello Road there describe Boris Johnson as a trickster. I suspect there are people in your party coming round to think that. Is that fair?
No, it's not fair at all. I mean, if you've seen Boris, whatever you think about Boris, whether you agree with him, whether you don't, whether you like him or you don't, you've got to sense the fact that he's brought energy, positive nature, an optimistic nature and leadership, which is what we've been looking for in Parliament, because Parliament, frankly, over the last 3 years...
But has he lost his touch?
No, I don't think he does. I mean, you know, this is a guy that's been going out there and been really clear about getting Brexit done by October the 31st so we can get onto the domestic agenda, so we can talk about 20,000 new policemen, of which we need our share in London, I think we'll all agree, of which we, you know, get the NHS funding, which we need in London, and the education funding that we need in London.
Rupert, why is your leader so scared of a general election?
Oh no, we're not scared at all. We say bring it on, and we've been ready for a long time.
Bring it on, but not yet.
I go door knocking every Saturday and Sunday, but I don't think there's a public appetite for this. And I have to say, we don't want to be tricked by Boris, because
how can you say there's no public appetite for it when your party's been calling for it for the last 2 years?
I mean, Brenda from Bristol, those kind of people. Honestly, if you talk to actual voters, but also we don't want to be tricked into being bounced into an election before we have ruled out no deal. So we want that enacted. And
so when Jeremy Corbyn was asking for election all year and John McDonnell was doing the same.
Yeah, but that was before we are where we are now. So, you know, we want no deal ruled out, which might sound good to Leavers because it's got the word no in it, but every government analysis has showed that for jobs, for people's livelihoods, for manufacturing, it would be terrible.
Tom, you're, of the three of you, you're the one who's got the marginal seat, 1,400 votes roughly in it. Are you fearing a general election?
No, not at all. The polling for us at the moment is fantastic, and of course, for the first time ever, the Liberal Democrats polled more votes in London than any of the other political parties in European elections. So we don't have an issue at all in terms of there being a general election. The only issue we have, as Rupert has just set out, is that Mr Johnson is not very trustworthy, and an election that takes place on the 15th of October, for instance, which would be his preference, is one in which he might still achieve his goal, which is to crash the UK out of the EU with no deal. So a general election from the 1st of November onwards, once an extension has been secured, fantastic, we're up for it. And we would love, in particular, to target seats like pause.
But you're saying target winning, but clearly neither of these guys, neither of these have got the confidence that they're going to win.
But
because that's what you're expecting Boris to be coming back and perhaps changing. That's what you're saying,
Paul,
isn't it?
we don't have confidence in your leader because we've seen from things like the closure of ticket
officers. But your confidence about Boris is clearly that he's still going to be Prime Minister on the 15th or the 16th of October. That's what he's basically saying.
A week ago he was saying this week he doesn't want an election.
You're literally going into an election thinking that Boris is going to be leader of Prime Minister on the 16th of October. That's what you're saying.
We want to get no deal ruled out first because we know with all these things he says one thing, he does another. He said he wasn't going to prorogue. He did. He said he didn't want an election.
Can I just ask you, do you expect to take a pasting in London from the Lib Dems?
I think, with Lib Dems are polling higher, so I'm expecting my majority will go down, but and as others because the way that the debate has polarised people across all sorts of constituencies. I'm delighted that there are a team of people out in Croydon and Wellington that have been out tonight, and I'm very much expecting Conservatives to be out in Ealing as well tonight, and right the way across all of this period. But look, we've had all of this for all these months now. People have been saying, let's have an election, let's have an election. Boris needs a mandate. Well, this is it.
We're offering you an election, Paul, on the 1st of November.
Yeah, what's a couple of days going to be?
Any date after the 1st of November, once we've locked in an extension so that you and Boris Johnson can't crash us out of the EU.
Because I'm confident.
Because as people see Boris at the dispatch box shambling and bumbling all week, as we see that every day he's lost 21 MPs in one day.
I can tell you why I want it. I'll tell you why I want it now. It's really quite frankly obvious why I want it now, because I want to be leaving the EU by the 31st of October, and only Boris is going to do that. Jeremy Corbyn clearly is not going to do that.
Rupert, there is a point that at least if you have it on the 15th, the new Prime Minister, which you presumably expect to be Jeremy Corbyn, can go to the EU Council on the 17th.
We need to see that properly sealed up, because then he could just say, oh, it's a new government, and negate that whole vote that we had. And it's really worrying that they've been saying that they'll ignore. But isn't that the point of a general election? If the public wants the new Prime Minister to do that, that's the way it is. I mean, look, we will have an election when we're ready, which is when no deal is ruled out, not just because Dominic Cummings wants an election. And remember, the whole point of this was unelected bureaucrats. We've got this guy pulling the puppet strings.
Dominic Cummings,
he's not even a Conservative member.
Has become the bogeyman of your party. He's Boris Johnson's main advisor. I heard him described by one Conservative MP, or one MP, as a homegrown psychopath. Is that slightly unfair?
There's a lot of mythical qualities and attributes that have been put to a load of people in Number 10. Look, Boris is the leader. He's the guy that's making the decisions. He's making it with his cabinet, and there's a collective responsibility with our party. And we want to leave the EU by October the 31st, which will give this country the certainty we want, and that we can do that through the EU.
One fell swoop, Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson have completely wiped out the government's majority by sacking 21 moderate Conservatives who are worried about crashing the UK out of the EU with no deal, with the consequent medicines, food and fuel shortages, problems on the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, set out in your own documents, Operation Yellowhammer.
Tom, 8 of those Conservative rebels who've lost the whip are from London and the home counties. 2 of them from London, Justine Greening and Stephen Hammond. Have you approached any of them to see if they'll come over to the Lib Dems?
Well, clearly it's sort of in vogue to join the Liberal Democrats, to defect from other parties to join us. If any of them are interested, then clearly, providing they subscribe to Liberal Democrat values, then of course we are a very
I didn't really ask a vague question about what's in vogue. I was asking, have you actually approached any of them?
Well, obviously we have discussions with MPs across the political spectrum on issues like Brexit. It may well be that we talk to them about what their futures might look like in the Conservative Party, and for some of them at the moment it looks pretty bleak.
So do we take that as a yes?
Those conversations happen all the time.
And do you fear those MPs that your leader has kicked out joining the Lib Dems?
They haven't been kicked out of the party. They've lost the whip because they've lost.
So will they be invited back?
They've lost the whip because they've actually what they've done. The way that they voted to hand power.
As Boris Johnson did.
They voted to hand power to Jeremy Corbyn and the rest of the Parliament because actually to have a surrender bill. Because actually, what's in this bill? Make no mistake, this bill literally has written the letter for the British Prime Minister to hand to the EU to give the EU permission to
that is accurate,
to dictate
isn't it? Paul is,
when we
is
leave
right
the
there.
EU.
What the bill does is, of course, which has been approved by a majority in Parliament, so it's actually members of Parliament who have made the decision, is requires the Prime Minister to seek an extension if he has not secured a deal. And of course, he keeps telling us that he's trying to do that. If he's not secured a deal by the 19th of October, he has to go to the European Union to seek an extension to the 31st of January, which members of Parliament, a majority of us, have asked him to
it's
do.
The EU that now
if the
calls the
EU
shots.
suggests a different date, then that has to come back to Parliament for Parliament, members of Parliament, to vote on it. So it's members of Parliament who are asking our Prime Minister to secure that extension. It's not the EU who are instructing him to take it.
So we're basically hamstrung now. So inevitably, you would look at this and say it's going to be so much more difficult to get as good a deal as we can if we're sitting there. Yes, there is. There absolutely is.
There are no reports from anywhere, Paul, that there are negotiations going on.
Well, now, I'm conscious that the two of you have spent the last couple of minutes ganging up on Paul. Can you throw him a lifeline? Would you like to?
I know lots of Conservatives that I've spoken to in the week.
How the Tories can possibly get out of this mess?
Well, my lifeline is very simple. It's the same lifeline that we offered Theresa May.
It's a referendum.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. We did not like her deal. If Boris Johnson comes forward with a deal, we will say, as we did to her, we will, in effect, hold our noses, let that deal go through, as long as you agree to hold a people's vote so that the people can judge whether what has finally been agreed is acceptable to them or not, and if it's not acceptable, they should have the right to vote to stay in the EU.
Effectively, you're extending the uncertainty in this country.
We are facing uncertainty for years. In order to have this, your constituents,
Tom, you know, your constituents in Washington asked to leave the EU
on the 31st of October.
And also, we need
the people in Sutton across the borough.
These arguments about Brexit for the next 10 years.
Tom, you can talk over me all you like, but you know your constituency voted to leave the EU, and you spent 3 years undoing what your own constituents have said to do.
Suggests they do the opposite.
But the day after, you were still going against the wishes of your constituents and my constituents, who were very, very clear about what they wanted.
Your constituents and my constituents both voted for the Liberal Democrats. For the first time, more people voted in your constituency and mine in the European elections for the Liberal Democrats than for any other party since the European elections started. So I would say that was a good indication of where people
picking
stand.
and choosing which votes you support and which ones you don't.
Can I ask you, you've been in London for a long time. Are you surprised at how Boris has turned out as Prime Minister?
I mean, I must say, I think it's been a pretty shambolic first week.
But are you surprised?
And again,
did you expect better?
I think no wonder he curtailed Parliament, because people can see what he's like. And again, he said, we know that you can't trust Boris from what he says and what he does. That's why we don't want to give him a blank cheque of an election.
So were you surprised by his performance?
Lemmings for him.
No, I think his performance as London Mayor, I think the main thing that he benefited from was actually something that was nothing to do with him, which is the fact that the Olympics had been secured before he became the mayor. I think if you look at his track record in terms of Garden Bridge, in terms of Route Master buses, actually it's a pretty poor track record.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you all there. We've run out of time, as usual. Thank you all very much to all my guests tonight, to Dominic, to Rupert, Paul and Tom. What a time to be covering politics. We'll be back with all the latest developments in the next edition of The Late Debate. Until then, thank you for watching and good night.